Hey SEC family, thank you for joining me today for another video devotion. Do you know that God does not bless self-reliant people? He blesses people who are dependent upon Him. Lots of people think the phrase, God helps those who help themselves, is in the Bible. No, that's not in there. God helps those who depend on Him. He helps people who are surrendered to Him. He blesses people who are submitted to Him. What are you expecting God to do in your life? Really? What are you expecting God to do in your life this week? Without even talking to you, without even knowing you, I can tell you exactly what God's doing in your life. He's doing what you expect Him to. No more, no less. Because if you study the scriptures, you'll find that every time God moved out of heaven and moved on earth, and He did a miracle, it's because somebody believed. Somebody expected God to act. The more you depend on God instead of yourself, the more God's going to bless you. If you depend on God a little bit, you get a little bit of blessing. But if you depend on God a whole lot, you get a whole lot of blessing. It's all dependent on living by God's power. Ephesians 3:20 says, by His mighty power at work within us, He is able to accomplish infinitely more than we could ever dare to ask or hope. How do I get God's power in my life? 3 ways. Number 1, by praying. Prayer is the connection to God's power. Much prayer, much power. Little prayer, little power. No prayer, no power. Let me ask you about your prayer life. And I'll tell you how much power you've got in your life. I get power in my life by praying. In the scriptures, in the book of James, it tells us the earnest, heartfelt, continued prayer of a righteous man makes tremendous power available. That goes for you women too. If you don't have any power in your life, that tells me one thing. You're not praying. Real simple. Because prayer and power go together. There's a second way you get God's power in your life. By taking risks to obey God. God says, when you take a risk to do what I tell you to do, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular, even when it may cost you, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it is expensive, even when nobody else around you is doing it, if you'll take that risk, if you'll obey me, God says, I'll pour out my power in your life. We only grow when our faith is being stretched, when it's being stretched beyond our comfort zone. If you're not taking risks in your life, then you don't need any faith. But if you want to see a miracle, you must make the first step. If you want to walk on water, so to speak, well, you got to get out of the boat. The third thing that brings God's power in our life is number 3, by not giving up. We get God's power when we pray. We get God's power when we step out and take a risk. And we get God's power when we hold on, when we don't give up. In order for God to grow our faith, He's got to test it. When you're going through difficulties and delays and dead ends and despair and discouragement, God is saying, this is a test. I'm going to teach you how to trust me so I can pour out my faith and my power in you. If you hang on, God will bless you. How do I live by God's power? I pray, I take risks in faith, and I do the thing that I fear the most, and I hang on. Let's think about some applications for this week. Are you being more self-reliant or dependent on God, God-reliant in your life right now? Let me ask you another one. What area of your life can you trust God more with? What area of your life do you need more of God's power? How will you tap into that power? And finally, what are you expecting God to do in your life this week? I think that's what he's going to do, is whatever you expect. If you expect him to do nothing, he'll probably do nothing. If you expect God to do some big things, those expectations will be met. I want you to know that I love you. I'm praying for you. I hope you have a great day.